Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with jazz pianist, composer, and educator Earl MacDonald. We talked to him about the world we are living in, his career in music, and the new 2021 CD Consecrated from the label Outside in Music. All 7 of his albums differ in instrumentation, ranging from a quartet composed of cello, saxophone, piano, and percussion to a full 17-piece jazz big band. As a composer, he embraces the roles of social commentator and provocateur, broaching consequential subject matter in his music. He also serves as a professor and director of jazz studies at the University of Connecticut. He's busy, and he's got great stories. Enjoy.
Hey, great to talk to you.
Great to talk to you. Hey, thanks for taking a minute out.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
So let's dive into your album, Consecrated, and it's a deeply spiritual album. A lot going on here. And before we get into, kind of your thoughts on the artistry that went into this, I want to know, it's coming out during a pandemic. What does it mean for you to have this come out now? What was the timing like? And, there's been such limited interaction with fans for almost a year and a half now.
The album was actually recorded pre-pandemic, about a week or so before everything shut down, and we didn't really even foresee any of that happening. During the pandemic, of course, and during the complete shutdown is the time when I mixed it and did any editing that was required. That became twice as hard, as you can imagine, because we couldn't do it in person. So we were going back and forth, just sending digital files and writing extensive notes. So I'll tell you, I'm thrilled that the process is over and that we can resume life. But on the spiritual side, I guess, I'm not sure how I'd answer that question. I think it has been an interesting period, right? A period where we've been able to be quiet and to reflect. And in that sense, I think it's timely because I think many of us have reevaluated our spirituality and our relationship with the church and also with God during this time. In that sense, I think it is timely.
So does this release, is it sweeter for you because all of this was done before the pandemic and now you have kind of a reflective bone to kind of look at this in a different light?
I would say yes.
Yeah.
That's not much of an answer, is it? But yes.
Well, okay, let's piggyback off of that. All of us, as you mentioned, it was very reflective this time of quarantine and lockdown. What did you learn about yourself that maybe you didn't realize before that's going to make you stronger as we all start kind of reemerging from our caves, so to speak?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of, in my own faith, I've been deconstructing a lot and trying to figure out where, how I relate to the church, how I relate to other Christians, in fact. I did a lot of reflecting, and a lot of it, really had to do with the last election, last presidential election, or the one before that, especially, right? When Trump was elected, it really threw me for a loop. I was questioning whether or not Christians, their support for him was so strong, and I couldn't quite understand it, because in many ways I thought that he represented sort of the antithesis of what Christianity stands for. In a lot of ways, I've been wrestling with that even now, as I think about how I relate to my fellow Christians, and that's been a huge part of my existence during this time period, unfortunately.
I find that to be the biggest paradox that we're living through right now. It almost seems like an alternate reality. I'm not quite sure whether you're Christian or any other kind of denomination that you can believe in somebody that does things so ruthlessly as this human being does. That's the thing that gets me. And for some reason, he has been built up on this pedestal of morality that is so, like you said, the antithesis of what he really is. So, I think that's probably out of all of this is probably the most perplexing thing about our reality right now that's in front of us.
And that's what inspired the one piece on my album, which is entitled By Our Love. I don't know if you'd like me to go into more detail on that one, but I'd be happy to if you wish.
Please do.
Okay. So that piece, it's based off of a hymn or a spiritual song that was written in the 1960s. And it's called They Will Know We Are Christians by Our Love. The story behind it for me was when Trump was elected, I was, of course, perplexed, and I heard that stat that 80% had voted for him. I couldn't make sense of it, but I went to church that Sunday, and the first song that was performed by the worship band was this, They Will Know We Are Christians by Our Love. And they did it in kind of an upbeat reggae manner with their little band. And I was looking around, and I was seeing people smiling and singing along and having a good time, and I just wasn't in that headspace. I was thinking, what's going on here? They'll know we are Christians by our love. If anything, it's the exact opposite. It's almost like they'll know we are Christians for supporting this person with these cruel immigration policies, is anything but humble, who I could go down the list of all the ways in which this is paradoxical. And I just couldn't sing the song. So I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do, but my response was to write an arrangement of the piece. I turned that piece upside down, basically. I wrote it in a arrangement based in 5/4. I've added lots of dissonance. Basically, to when people listen to it, I want them to ask, what's going on? What kind of statement is he trying to make here? Hopefully that comes through in the music. There's also a video that was created to reinforce all of that through imagery and sharing scripture verses that would prompt people's thinking as well.
You just kind of, I'm going down memory lane here. On March 3rd, 2020, Bill Frisell came to Kansas City, and he played at the art gallery here at the Nelson. And towards the end of the show, we had just heard that, on the coast, there was some murmuring about the coronavirus and what are we going to do? No real strong drumbeat yet. Maybe it's just because of where we are in the Midwest. But there was this feeling, it was palpable. And at one point, they played We Shall Overcome. And
right.
Everybody stood up and started swaying. And it was surreal. Like, we all kind of was like, we were all getting to that point where we were putting that paper boat down in the river and we were like, our old life's gone. Like, we all kind of knew that, like cows and animals know before the hurricane or the tornado comes. It's like we knew, but we didn't. So anyway, I was thinking about you talking about that song and what it meant and how, obviously it was different for you, but it's powerful how groups get together and interact and react to song and music together.
No question.
So talk to me about the Flashpoint, the moments in your youth that said, music is for me, jazz is for me, let's do this.
Interesting. Yeah, so, as a kid, I started by playing the electronic organ. My parents signed me up for group organ lessons. And my dad had built a Heathkit organ, and so that was my first instrument. Around the time I was 5, my family started attending church. And shortly after that, I'd say by the time I was 7 years old, I was playing regularly in church services on electronic organ. I remember that I was so short that I couldn't reach the pedals, so I had to stand to play the pedals. That was pivotal and shaping in terms of my musical development. In high school, I made the switch to piano, and that's when I started playing in the high school jazz band, and got an interest in jazz. So simultaneously, those two things were going on at the same time. I continued to play in church, and I was also learning to play jazz music. And the two overlapped on occasion because I'd be asked to prepare, let's say, an offertory where they pass the offering basket and there'd be music behind it. So I'd do a special music number. And at that point, I started to create some jazzy arrangements of hymns. That was the beginning, I guess, of this kind of project. So I in my filing cabinet, I probably have 100 or so of these little arrangements that I've written. So I certainly had lots to choose from when it came time to actually record this.
So what was the first live jazz show that you saw that blew you away?
Wow. That's interesting. So, and I'm not sure what my answer would be. So I grew up in Winnipeg, similar to the Midwest there. We didn't have a lot of groups that came through that were big name jazz groups. There were some local jazz musicians. There was a pianist, Ron Paley, he played bass with Buddy Rich's band. And he was local and had his own big band. And so I learned a lot through listening to them. It really probably wasn't until I was a university student in Montreal that I started to encounter some of the bigger names, like Joe Lovano came through and worked with us. I remember Barry Harris came through. But maybe even more memorable than that was when I moved to New York and was finally able to hang out at clubs like Bradley's. It was the nightclub where the musicians would hang out late at night after their gigs, and I'd be sitting at the bar, and that's when I sort of started to be able to interact with the big name musicians, and where it dawned on me that they're just mere mortals, right? They're humans like I am, and before that I had always thought of them sort of as a godlike status because I just knew them through their albums. But here they were, we'd be sitting at the bar and they might be burping or farting or whatever. And I went, wow, here's someone that I've idolized, but it's just a person just like me. And in some ways that opened my mind to thinking, hey man, maybe I can do this.
So did you always know it was going to be music for you, or did you have other dreams?
I grew up in Canada and I played ice hockey, so that was a passion of mine. Maybe I thought I was going to be an NHL goaltender. But even then, you'll get a kick out of this. My interest in hockey and music collided. I was the organist for the Winnipeg Jets when I was in high school. And so that was my first big professional gig, playing for like 15,000 fans every night. But yeah, to answer your question, from pretty early on, I was interested in music, yes.
So you've been around a lot of big names in jazz, and you've learned from a lot of legends and luminaries. What did you get from them, whether they directly taught you or by osmosis, that you in turn have digested and made your own to give to the youth that you teach?
Well, my time with Maynard Ferguson's band was very important. Learned a lot of life lessons from him. I learned a lot of lessons about show business. I remember the first gig that we did was eye-opening in terms of the pacing. How there was no wasted time in between tunes. It was the first time that I sort of realized, hey, this is a show. It's not just about music. It's about really entertaining. So there's that. There was how to plan a set list, for instance. He would often refer to the first three songs as the big three, to really make that impact and to keep it high energy before you taper it down and get into something that would be softer and more sentimental, perhaps. So I learned those kind of lessons from him. I would say, he's probably the one that I learned the most from.
What do you like the best about being a professional musician? You've done it for a while. You wake up every day. You get the chance to create. What is it that you enjoy the most about the process?
I've had this conversation recently with my wife. I said one of the things that I like is that I can really switch gears quite often. So, right now I'm releasing an album and I'm kind of in promotional mode, where writing to reviewers, doing interviews like this, creating press releases, all of that kind of business. That's very different from practicing the piano or from writing big band music, for instance. So I'm currently in that phase, but very soon the life cycle of this album will have expired, and then I'll be on to the next project. And I like that. So, on the horizon, and I do have some big band projects, some projects for which I've been commissioned to write some pieces. So I'm just going to be holed up in my studio with some music paper and writing like mad. So I'll completely shift gears there, right? Then another phase of my life, I might be grant writing, planning to create some finances to support the next project. Then there's teaching. There's just so much diversity to what it is that I do that it's impossible to be bored.
So let's say you come to Kansas City and you play Consecrated for a live crowd. You got to write up a release, a notice, to get people to come to your show. With all the options that are out there, Kansas City's pretty flush nightly with jazz. What are you going to say about your show? How are you going to get seats into those bodies into seats?
Well, I think it appeals to several demographics, I will say, right? One demographic would be churchgoers, the people that would be familiar with this music, where there might be, a hint of nostalgia, remembering some of these old hymns. I think the music also appeals to another audience as well. The music, I think, stands on its own. They're really fresh arrangements. I've done some interesting things with them. And the instrumentalists that I'm playing with are top-notch musicians, some that have won or been nominated for Grammy Awards. So I think there's a wide appeal in this project to several different groups.
So everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, your students, but ultimately you live your life, you wake up every day and have a perception of you. Who do you think you are?
Oh, that's a funny question. I am I'm a devoted husband and father. First of all, I've got two teenage kids and we're homeschooling them. I started my day today with doing Algebra 1 with my son. So that's something very different, right? And but that's an integral part of my life. And I practice music with them. My son plays trumpet, and so I learned to trumpet along with him, and that's become a daily routine. I'm also a runner, so I train for marathons, and I'm out there and trying to take care of myself physically. But then on the professional side, I'm a composer and arranger, but I play the piano as well. So I switch back and forth between those two musical roles. And of course, I'm a university professor. So, man, there's a lot of different components to my life. I find a lot of satisfaction in all of those areas.
Right on. Earl, thank you for taking some time out to talk about the album and your life and music. I appreciate it. Good luck with everything.
Okay, thanks so much. I appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Canada, Connecticut, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Earl for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.